The singing always began at exactly 11:47 p.m. No one in the old apartment building knew the woman behind the thin concrete wall. No one knew her name, why she lived alone, or why she never stepped outside before sunset. But every night, when the city surrendered to darkness and distant sirens echoed through the streets, her voice drifted through the silence like a ghost refusing to be forgotten. Only one man listened. He wasn't supposed to. The top floor of the building belonged to the most feared man in the city's underworld, a crime king whose empire stretched across ports, casinos, shipping companies, luxury hotels, and politicians who owed him favors they could never repay. His enemies whispered his name with dread. His allies never spoke it louder than necessary. Damien Moretti had built his reputation on one simple truth. He never allowed emotions to interfere with business. Mercy had no place in his world. Love was a weakness. Trust was a death sentence. For 12 years he had ruled his criminal empire with terrifying precision, eliminating traitors before they even realized they had been discovered. Entire organizations had disappeared after making the mistake of challenging him. Every move he made resembled a carefully planned game of chess, and every opponent eventually became another forgotten casualty. Yet every night, he found himself standing beside the wall separating his penthouse from the neighboring apartment, listening. Her voice never repeated the same song. Sometimes it sounded like an old lullaby, soft enough to calm nightmares. Other nights it carried a quiet sadness so profound it made even the city's endless rain seem insignificant. She never sang for applause. She sang as though she believed no one was listening. Damien never learned the lyrics. He only remembered the feeling. It was the only sound in his world that wasn't poisoned by fear, greed, or blood. His bodyguards noticed a strange routine. None dared ask questions. Questions had gotten better men buried beneath concrete. Then everything changed. On a cold November night, the music never came. 11:47. Silence. 11:52. Nothing. Midnight. Still nothing. Damien remained motionless beside the wall, his expression unreadable. The silence grew heavier than gunfire. Something was wrong. For the first time in years, instinct, not strategy, told him to move. His security chief was halfway through reporting the execution of 2 rival captains when Damien suddenly raised a hand. The room fell silent. Without explanation, he walked toward the hallway. His men exchanged nervous glances. Their boss had interrupted meetings before, never because of silence. He stopped outside the neighboring apartment. The hallway smelled of dust and old paint. A cracked ceiling light flickered overhead. No guards, no surveillance. Just a weathered wooden door. He stared at it longer than he cared to admit. Then, for the first time in over a decade, Damien Moretti knocked on someone else's door. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. An uneasy feeling tightened inside him. The lock wasn't fully closed. The door slowly drifted inward with a faint creak. Darkness greeted him. The apartment looked painfully ordinary. A tiny kitchen. A worn sofa. Stacks of library books. A chipped coffee mug resting beside handwritten pages covered in musical notes. There was no sign of luxury, no sign of safety, only signs of survival. Then he saw the blood. A thin trail crossed the wooden floor toward the bedroom. Every instinct sharpened. Within seconds, Damien had a pistol in one hand and his phone in the other. 2 of his bodyguards stormed inside moments later. The bedroom door stood half open. The woman lay unconscious beside the bed. Her pale sweater was stained crimson where a knife wound cut across her side. Broken glass glittered beneath her trembling hand. Someone had attacked her. The window overlooking the fire escape stood wide open. The attacker was already gone. Damien knelt beside her. She couldn't have been older than 26. Dark hair framed a face exhausted by too many sleepless nights. Even unconscious, tears remained frozen on her cheeks. Her breathing was shallow, weak. One of the guards quietly spoke. "Boss, ambulance." Damien didn't answer immediately. His eyes stopped on a silver chain around her neck. Hanging from it was an old key, not an ordinary key. A handcrafted brass key engraved with the crest of the Romano family. His pulse slowed. The Romanos, a family erased 15 years ago. Every newspaper had called it a massacre. Every survivor had supposedly died, including the little daughter who vanished before anyone found her body. Impossible. He looked again. The engraving was unmistakable. Only blood relatives carried those heirloom keys. His mind raced through memories buried beneath years of violence. The Romano massacre, the betrayal, the anonymous informant, the warehouse fire, the missing child. Someone had lied. Someone had spent 15 years hiding her. Before he could speak, the unconscious woman whispered something so faint it barely escaped her lips. A single name. Luca. Damien's expression hardened. Luca wasn't merely a name. It belonged to the man who had betrayed both the Romano family and Damien's father years earlier before disappearing with millions of dollars and secrets powerful enough to destroy entire criminal dynasties. Everyone believed Luca was dead. Apparently, everyone had been wrong. The ambulance arrived under Damien's direct protection. No police reports were filed. No questions were permitted. Within an hour, the entire hospital floor had been secured by armed men posing as private security. Doctors worked under silent pressure, understanding only one thing. The patient had to survive. As dawn broke over the city, Damien stood alone outside her hospital room. His empire was unraveling. Rival families were preparing for war. A traitor from the past had resurfaced. And somehow, the mysterious woman whose voice had crossed a single apartment wall every night was standing at the center of it all. But the greatest mystery wasn't why someone wanted her dead. It was why she had been living only a few feet away from the most dangerous man in the city, without either of them knowing that fate had been quietly preparing them for the same war. When she finally opened her eyes, would she recognize the man who had saved her, or would she reveal a secret capable of bringing the entire Moetti empire crashing to the ground? Morning light filtered through reinforced hospital windows, but it brought no warmth. The private medical wing remained unnaturally quiet, guarded by men who answered only to Damien Moetti. Doctors moved with measured precision, aware that failure here carried consequences far beyond professional embarrassment. Inside the room, the woman finally regained consciousness. Her eyelids fluttered open to unfamiliar white ceilings and the rhythmic beeping of medical monitors. Confusion clouded her expression before panic replaced it. She instinctively reached for her side, wincing as pain shot through the fresh stitches beneath the bandages. Her first instinct was not to ask where she was. It was to search for the brass key hanging from her neck. Only after her trembling fingers found the chain did she allow herself to breathe. From outside the room, Damien watched through the narrow glass panel in the door. He had spent the entire night reviewing files long buried in the archives of his organization. Every surviving document connected to the Romano massacre ended with the same conclusion: no heirs, no witnesses, no future. Yet the woman inside wore proof that the reports had been fabricated. Someone had rewritten history. Someone powerful enough to fool every criminal family in the city. His thoughts were interrupted when one of his intelligence officers approached carrying a sealed envelope. "We searched her apartment, boss." Damien accepted it without a word. Inside were photographs recovered from beneath loose floorboards. Most had been damaged by moisture, but one image remained almost untouched. A smiling family stood in front of a countryside estate nearly 20 years earlier. A little girl, no older than 6, sat on her father's shoulders. Around her neck hung the same brass key. Damien's jaw tightened. There could no longer be any doubt. The unknown singer was Isabella Romano, the child the underworld had believed dead for 15 years. But another discovery disturbed him even more. Hidden among the photographs were pages of handwritten sheet music. Between the musical notes were coded symbols so subtle that an ordinary person would mistake them for artistic markings. Damien recognized them immediately. They were encrypted communication codes once used by the old Mafia families before encrypted phones existed. Songs. Every song Isabella had sung through the apartment wall had contained messages. Not for him, for someone else. His pulse slowed. That meant whoever attacked her wasn't trying to rob or silence an innocent woman. They were hunting information. Inside the hospital room, Isabella slowly pieced together fragments of the previous night. A shadow climbing through her window. The glint of a knife. The desperate struggle. Her notebook scattering across the floor. Then darkness. She noticed movement near the doorway. A tall man entered, dressed in an immaculate black suit. His presence transformed the atmosphere instantly. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. Damien Moetti carried authority the way storms carried thunder, effortlessly and without warning. Isabella didn't know his face, but she recognized danger when she saw it. He studied her silently. She met his gaze despite the fear tightening inside her. Neither spoke for several long seconds. It was a silent battle neither intended to lose. Finally, Damien placed the old family photograph on the bedside table. The color drained from Isabella's face. She hadn't seen that photograph since childhood. She looked from the picture to the brass key around her neck, then back to the stranger standing before her. For the first time since waking, genuine fear eclipsed her confusion. If he had found the photograph, he knew who she was. And if he knew who she was, then every ghost from her past had finally caught up. Before she could gather the courage to ask a single question, the television mounted on the hospital wall abruptly switched on. Every channel carried the same breaking news. A prominent shipping warehouse had exploded before dawn. Authorities suspected an industrial accident. Damien knew better. That warehouse had belonged to one of his largest import operations. The explosion wasn't an accident. It was a declaration of war. One of his bodyguards rushed into the room, his usually composed face strained. "Boss," he said, lowering his voice, "3 of our captains were executed this morning." Each body was left with the same symbol carved into the wall. Damien's expression remained calm, but his eyes darkened. "The Raven has returned." The name alone was enough to chill every loyal man in the room. The Raven wasn't merely an assassin. He was the unseen architect behind the Romano massacre 15 years earlier, the one criminal mastermind whose body had never been found, whose network had never truly disappeared. And if he was hunting Isabella now, it meant she possessed something far more valuable than memories. Unaware that her quiet songs had been carrying secrets hidden in plain sight, Isabella realized that surviving the knife attack had only delayed the inevitable. The real hunt had just begun, and the only man capable of keeping her alive was also the most feared predator in the criminal underworld. The hospital became a fortress before sunset. Every entrance was sealed. Snipers occupied neighboring rooftops. Black SUVs formed an armored perimeter around the building, while Damien's most trusted soldiers swept every floor for hidden explosives and disguised assassins. To the outside world, it appeared that an influential billionaire was recovering from surgery. Only those inside knew the truth. The city was on the edge of another Mafia war. Damien stood before a wall-sized digital map inside the hospital's temporary command room. Red markers appeared one after another across the city. Safe houses raided, warehouses burned, trusted informants disappearing without a trace. The Raven wasn't simply attacking. He was dismantling the Moetti Empire piece by piece. And every move pointed toward Isabella. What makes her so valuable? Damien asked quietly. His intelligence chief placed a weathered leather journal on the table. It wasn't in her apartment. We found it inside an abandoned music school she visited every month. Damien opened the journal. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary notebook filled with lyrics and unfinished melodies. Then he noticed it, the same coded symbols hidden between the notes. He overlaid one page onto an old map of the city's underground tunnels. The symbols aligned perfectly. His eyes narrowed. The songs weren't messages. They were a map. For 15 years, Isabella had unknowingly preserved the location of a hidden vault created by the Romano family before they were slaughtered. According to old legends, that vault contained more than money. It held ledgers naming politicians, judges, police commissioners, and mafia leaders who had secretly built the city's criminal empire together. Anyone who controlled those records wouldn't just control the underworld. They could destroy it. Everything suddenly made sense. The attack, the surveillance, the silence outside her apartment. The Raven had spent years searching for the final piece of the puzzle, never realizing it had been disguised as music. Before Damien could speak, the hospital lights flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. Gunfire erupted through the corridors. The deafening roar of automatic rifles shattered the silence as alarms screamed throughout the building. "They're inside!" Someone yelled over the radio. Smoke grenades rolled beneath security doors, filling hallways with thick gray clouds. Masked gunmen dressed as emergency responders stormed the intensive care wing with ruthless precision. The Raven had launched his assault. Damien moved without hesitation. He reached Isabella's room just as 2 attackers burst through the doorway. The first never had time to raise his weapon. Damien disarmed him with brutal efficiency before driving him into the wall. The second fired wildly. Glass exploded. Medical equipment crashed to the floor. Isabella threw herself behind the hospital bed as bullets ripped through the room. Her heart pounded louder than the gunfire. This wasn't the quiet life she'd spent years building. This was the nightmare she had been running from since childhood. Damien grabbed her hand. "Move!" It was the first word he had spoken directly to her. Together they raced through emergency stairwells while explosions echoed below. Entire floors descended into chaos. Outside, Moretti soldiers exchanged relentless fire with waves of attackers flooding the hospital grounds. The city watched the smoke rise, believing it to be another tragic accident. Only the underworld understood. Its kings were fighting. They reached the rooftop moments before another explosion shook the building. A helicopter descended through the smoke. Escape was only seconds away. Then a slow clap echoed behind them. Damien turned. A lone figure emerged from the haze wearing a long black coat and a silver raven pin on his collar. His face bore the scars of countless battles, but his smile remained calm, almost amused. "The great Damien Moretti," he said. "You finally found my little songbird." Isabella froze. The voice. She remembered it from years ago, the voice that had echoed through flames on the night her family died. The raven. He hadn't aged into a monster. He had always been one. Without warning, he pulled a small remote from his pocket. "My men never came here expecting to kill you," he said, his gaze fixed on Isabella. "I only needed you to remember." He pressed the button. Across the city, a series of synchronized explosions erupted from Moretti-owned warehouses, casinos, and shipping docks. Towers of fire illuminated the skyline, each blast destroying another piece of Damien's empire. Within minutes, billions in assets were reduced to ash. The raven smiled as sirens filled the night. "I didn't come for your empire," he whispered. "I came to make sure you had nothing left to protect." Then his eyes settled on Isabella. "And now, you'll open the vault yourself." As armed reinforcements surrounded the rooftop from every direction, and Damien realized they had walked into a trap years in the making, he understood one terrifying truth. Saving Isabella had never been the beginning of the war. It had been exactly what the Raven had planned all along. Flames devoured the skyline, turning the city into a sea of orange and black. Smoke curled above shattered warehouses, collapsing docks, and casinos that had once symbolized Damien Moretti's untouchable empire. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting what the public believed was a coordinated terrorist attack. Only those born into the shadows understood the truth. A dynasty was being erased. On the hospital rooftop, armed men closed in from every direction. The Raven stood calmly at the center of the chaos, convinced he had already won. 4 years, he had orchestrated every move, manipulated every betrayal, and hunted every surviving trace of the Romano bloodline. He had overlooked one thing. Damien Moretti never fought the battle his enemies expected. As Isabella stared at the burning skyline, memories she had buried since childhood came crashing back. Her father hadn't hidden the family's greatest secret inside gold, diamonds, or offshore accounts. He had hidden it inside something no criminal would ever think to steal. Music. The songs she had spent years singing weren't simply encoded maps. Their sequence formed the final key, one that unlocked the truth behind the vault. In that instant, fragments of forgotten lullabies aligned in her mind, revealing the final piece her father had entrusted to her before the massacre. The vault wasn't beneath the city. It never had been. It was hidden inside the abandoned Romano Opera House, a place everyone believed had burned to the ground 15 years earlier. Beneath a collapsed stage rested not only the ledgers exposing corrupt officials and Mafia bosses, but also recorded evidence proving that the Raven had betrayed every family he had ever served, including the men now fighting beside him. The Raven noticed a realization in Isabella's eyes. His smile faded. For the first time in years, uncertainty crossed his face. That single hesitation was all Damien needed. The rooftop erupted into violence. Moretti's reinforcements burst through access doors as helicopters descended from opposite sides of the building. Gunfire echoed across the rooftop while Damien moved with ruthless precision, shielding Isabella as his men forced the Raven's soldiers backward. The Raven escaped the rooftop in the confusion, retreating toward the opera house with the few loyal followers he had left. He knew the race had begun. So did Damien. Hours later, beneath the ruins of the forgotten opera house, the final confrontation unfolded. Dust drifted through broken chandeliers as moonlight spilled across the cracked stage. Hidden beneath the floorboards lay the vault that had fueled 15 years of bloodshed. The Raven reached it first. His fingers had barely touched the ancient lock when Isabella stepped forward. She quietly began singing. The same haunting melody that had drifted through the apartment wall night after night. One by one, the notes aligned with engraved symbols surrounding the vault door. Hidden mechanisms clicked deep beneath the stone. The lock opened. Inside were rows of sealed documents, hard drive preserved in waterproof cases, and recordings that chronicled decades of corruption. Every betrayal, every assassination ordered behind closed doors, every politician bought by organized crime. The evidence was overwhelming. The Raven lunged toward the vault, but Damien intercepted him before he could reach it. Their fight was short, brutal, and fueled by years of buried vengeance. The man who had built his empire through manipulation finally faced someone who refused to be manipulated. When it ended, the Raven lay defeated beneath the very stage where he had once ordered an entire family erased. As police sirens surrounded the opera house, Damien made the one decision no one expected. He handed the evidence over, not to another Mafia family, not to corrupt officials, but to an international task force already investigating organized crime across multiple countries. Within weeks, politicians resigned, judges were arrested, and powerful crime syndicates collapsed under the weight of their own secrets. The underworld didn't disappear, but it changed forever. Damien disappeared from public view. Some claimed he fled the country. Others insisted he was rebuilding in silence. No one knew the truth. Months later, a small music school opened on a quiet street far from the city's violence. Every evening, children filled its halls with songs instead of fear. From across the street, a familiar black car occasionally appeared. Its driver never came inside. He simply listened. The same voice that had once echoed through a lonely apartment wall now carried hope instead of heartbreak. Neither Damien nor Isabella returned to the life that fate had tried to force upon them. They had been connected by betrayal, separated by blood, and reunited through music. In the end, the empire that guns could not destroy was undone by a forgotten melody, and the most feared Mafia boss in the city discovered that the one thing powerful enough to change a man's destiny had never been fear. It had been the voice behind the wall. And perhaps the greatest revenge is not destroying the darkness that hunts you, but surviving long enough to become the reason it can never rise again.